What are you guys? I'm just getting the creamer. What are you even doing in here? Episode 3. I didn't upload episode 3 yet? No. Hello everyone, welcome back to the cavern. xBundok here, and today we're going to be talking about the brush itself and how we can best use it for our miniature painting. Now, general things to remember about a brush: you've got the handle, which is obvious what the handle is, and then this metal part called the ferrule, hopefully that's how you pronounce it, and the bristles. Now, when we're working, we don't want any water or paint or ink or anything to go back up into the ferrule. So, as you can see, there's already staining on this brush where it did. So when you're working, you want to work on kind of the lower half of the bristles, maybe the lower 2/3. So before we paint, we don't want to start with a dry brush for using a brush like this. We'll talk about the actual dry brush later. So we want to wet our brush. You don't want it super saturated because, of course, that's going to thin out your paints. So I always dip it and I wipe it a little bit on the edge of the cup, and then I wipe it on the back of my hand too. I don't wipe it on a paper towel or anything like a cloth because I don't want it completely dry. I want the brush damp. So having that little bit of dampness is going to help you actually load the brush with paint and have it consistent and be able to deliver it consistently onto your model. So now that our brush is wet, we're going to take our paint here. It's best I can work with the angles. And so when we dip it, we want to dip again, just that front half, and we also want to twist it while we're working. I use a little bit less of an angle than some folks. Some people do it at a bit of a steeper angle, but what you're doing is while you're pressing it at an angle and twisting, you're forming a tip for the brush to use. Now, if you've been using your brushes for a while and it's not necessarily holding up too well, you might need to clean them and reshape them. And there's a whole bunch of tutorials on YouTube for that. You can see here, we don't have the brush filled the whole way up, just that front half. So whenever we go to apply, you should be able to deliver the color evenly on the model. So we have this dragon boy that we've been working on here, one of these Reaper models, and you can see I had some overspray, a lot of overspray with the airbrush. It always clogs at the inopportune times. And so we're just going to go over with 1 or 2 different shades here before we do a wash and some dry brush to just kind of blend it back in. And that's how you can evenly get color on your model. Now, you don't need smaller brushes for smaller areas. You can if that's what you prefer to use, but with the proper technique, if you get a fine enough tip, even on a larger brush, you can paint small details. So just remembering how to properly load the brush with paint and also keeping that tip while you are loading the brush can really help you out. If you find yourself struggling, maybe it can help you. Now, along with properly loading the brush and using the brush comes bracing. So you want to make sure that you're well set so you're not wobbly and you can pull straight lines, things like that. So when I'm painting smaller pieces, you can see here I had a little bit of tacky that I placed the horns on, so I'm not holding directly onto the piece. And what you can't see is my forearms are leaning against the edge of my desk, and then I have the hand that's holding the horn, and then the hand that is painting. And the hand that is painting is leaning for support on that other hand. So you don't have to worry about your personal shakiness. You can focus on just pulling straight lines with the brush and delivering the paint onto the model like you would want to. When you're first starting out, you may find yourself a little wobbly even with the 3 points of contact, and that's okay. You'll adjust to it eventually. Now for something larger, we can also brace against the model. I will say use this at your discretion. If you have wet paint, you might not want to brace on the model. Something like this where I know that I've been working in one area and not another. So if I'm working solely on his spines or his wings, I know that I can lean on the chest piece of the figure. Only do this if you know there's support with the figure. But for this part, this is the other way you can do it. If you're not leaning, again, you see the bottoms of my wrist, forearms are on the desk. One hand is supporting, it's not holding the model at all, and the other one is leaning on that hand for support, so we can get those detailed and well-pulled lines onto the figure. Now, you keep hearing me use the phrase well-pulled. It's a tattooing term. Whenever you're tattooing, you're pulling the line through, so that's where my brain goes whenever we're going over the instruction for this. But it doesn't have to be just the straight line, but it does help you deliver where you want to go. And you can focus on angling the brush and how you want to use just your fingers without worrying about, how your whole hand is going to shake or affect something, and just a lot more stability. If you're finding that your pieces have wavy bits, especially if you're doing edge highlighting or anything very small, straight, like you're working on eyes, your bracing is a great thing to remember. That may be something that you need to work on if you're having a lot of trouble and you can't figure out what's going on. If you're holding the model in one hand and the brush in the other, and you're not holding yourself up with anything, you don't have anything to lean on, that might be where a lot of your struggles are coming from. Now for dry brushing, again, like I said, we're coming back to it. I don't wet my brush. It is called dry brushing. I want the brush to be dry. I will usually work the tip of them a little bit just to make sure that the bristles are loose. There's no dry paint in there that I may not have gotten fully cleaned out from last time. So we're going to be doing a little bit of the dry brushing on the stones here, like I said, so we can layer up and add some highlights and some depth. Now, if you need to change the colors in your dry brush in between and you do rinse it out, make sure it doesn't have to thoroughly dry completely, but make sure it's relatively dry. So now we're just going to dip the bristles, the tip of them in here, and we're going to wipe off our excess. So I usually do that a little bit on the palette, and then I do a bit on the paper towel as well. Now they do make little plates, they're texture plates that you can use for your dry brushing. I don't have one. Again, I just roll with a textured paper towel so I can see how much might be on the brush and how much comes off. So what we're going to do, I'm going to hold the model in one hand, and for my dry brushing, I work with a fulcrum or a pivot point towards the back of the brush. So that gets, a little bit of the delivery. It's not stern. It helps me press a little bit less hard, but I will say I do dry brush heavy-handed to some folks' dismay. And while you're doing this, remember the direction that you're going in affects how it's going to look on the model. So you have to think about the planes that you're working with here. So for the planes on this portion, we have a lot of flat stones. So if I'm coming top down, that upper edge is what's going to get the light, and then the upper edge on any of the crevices. If I go left to right over the surfaces, that whole surface is going to get covered with the tone that I'm using for the dry brush. So just think about that with whatever you're working on. Something similar applies to shading. So, you have colored shades, black, brown, white, flesh tones, things that add effects. When you're shading, you have to remember that your direction will matter for this as much as where your brush leaves from. Okay, so the wash is going to sit wherever your brush traces and gets picked up from, because once you pick your brush up, that moisture is transferring from the brush to the model, so it will pool wherever you let that brush sit at the end. So we got the left wing done here. We're going to work on the right one. I'm doing a little bit of a strong tone wash. It's a green shade wash to kind of pull these tonals together. So I'm going to go from left to right here. Unfortunately, it's in the background and didn't focus in, but I'm going to go left to right because that is how the texture and the motion of the wing is going. And so I want that to be enunciated versus something going up and down or left and right. So if I were to pull this brush in the, I don't want to say wrong direction, but inappropriate direction, it might sit in these creases or these notches in the wrong manner, and it's going to make it look like it's, I don't want to say reverse highlighted, but the wrong things might be emphasized, okay? So hopefully you guys found these brush tips useful. Again, there's some things that I know, but I don't always actively think about, and sometimes I forgo them while I'm painting. So they're just good to think about once or twice, and we can discuss in a forum what works for you guys as well. Just leave them in the comments down below. As always, subscribe if you'd like to come back for more, and take care.